I worked out, and the Catch Lift Foundation really helped us all. Everyone that was in my group had made great strides from it.
I feel good. And like Cal's program is a big part of that, and all that different stuff with the coach's corner and having coaches or having different things. Use all of it. Whatever you need, use it to get you to where you need to be.
Thank you for tuning in to the Catch a Lift Fund's Coach's Corner podcast. We hope you enjoy today's episode and will consider supporting the Catch a Lift Fund and the veterans we serve. Visit our website for more information about our programs at catchaliftfund.org. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis or suicidal thoughts, please call 988 or the Veterans Crisis Line 988, followed immediately by the number 1. The views and opinions expressed during the Coach's Corner podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the Catch a Lift Fund. The Catch a Lift Fund does not verify or warrant the truth or accuracy of statements made during the podcast, and statements therein are not to be construed as an official policy or position of the Catch a Lift Fund. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and nothing herein should be construed as health, medical, or other professional advice. The Coach's Corner is a place for veterans to connect, heal, and share their stories. I'm Melissa Luke, the host of the Coach's Corner podcast. I am a U.S. Army Iraq War veteran, coach, and program director for the Catch a Lift Fund. The Coach's Corner is sponsored by ID Technologies. Welcome to this week's episode of the Coach's Corner. Thanks for joining us this week on the Coach's Corner. I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Jessica Morris. Jessica is a U.S. Army veteran, Cal coach, and so very much more. Welcome to this week's episode of the Coach's Corner. Jessica, welcome.
Thanks, Melissa. How's it going?
It's going good. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, guys. I'm excited to get started.
Good. Let's jump right into it, Jess. If you don't mind, Jess, talk to us a bit about your younger self and what led you to join the Army.
Well, I have a long family history of military service. My mom, in fact, is a Vietnam veteran, so she played a big influence in what I wanted to do with my life. I always felt like it was a very honorable path to go down, and it was exciting. I loved being active. I loved being fit. I loved being, involved with whatever mission or task I was doing, and you get a sense of accomplishment from having some sort of assignment and executing it. So while there are long-term projects that you have to do in the military, a lot of them are sort of time sensitive. So it was sort of an exciting lifestyle that I was attracted to. And in the meantime, I was looking forward to having a regimented sort of fitness routine. And actually, when I went to join the Army in 2005, my father really encouraged me to check out all the branches. So I went into the City Hall recruiting station in downtown Manhattan, and I spoke with everybody. And I spoke with the Air Force recruiter, and I asked her how their PT was, and she said, "Well, sometimes we get together with our squadron about once a week, but we don't really do. It's mostly on your own." And I looked at her and said, "Okay, thank you." And I got up to leave.
Hard pass.
Yeah, because she was like, "You can't make a decision based on PT." And I said, "Watch me." So it's always been important because it was sort of like my outlet and the steady in the storm when it came to what was going on in my life. I didn't have the most stable environment growing up in New York all the time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Jess, what year would it be that you would enlist, and how old were you?
I enlisted in 2005. I was 19. I didn't go to basic until March 2006. I did the delayed entry program
Okay.
while I was finishing up like a final paper for one of my classes at NYU, and yeah, I left. I handed my mom my phone. I don't want anything, don't bother me.
Yeah. Oh my
And I
gosh.
just sort of went off to basic training.
I want to just back up 1 minute here, Jess. So you mentioned New York. Did you grow up in New York?
I
Uh,
did. Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about what it was like growing up in New York and specifically at that time period, kind of, 9/11 and post 9/11. What was that like?
Yeah, so I was actually in high school. I was in 10th grade in 2002. I was late to my third period social studies class. Everybody remembers where they were, and I
Oh
looked
yeah.
out the window. We were 7 miles from the the impact zone from the World Trade Center.
Wow, that's not
So
far. Oh my gosh, 7 miles.
yeah, so when you look out the window of my high school, you could see over to Manhattan. I wasn't in the city. I was in Cedarhurst, New York,
Okay.
technically Nassau County, but right across the bridge. And you could see the skyline from the second floor of the high school, and the planes were flying really low. And I noticed that like it was weird because I was late to class, and I'm like, I gotta hurry up. I was already late. The bell already rang. Nobody else was in the hallway. And I get to class, and very soon after class began, they made these announcements. Um, and we were on lockdown because the dust in the air, the debris in the air, um, they were concerned for our respiratory wellness.
Right, right.
So instead of us being able to go home and be with our families and check on everyone, we had to stay in the school. And I can't remember when they finally let us out. I don't believe that we had to stay the entire rest of the day because this was still kind of early in the morning. Third
Yeah,
period around 10 a.m. or so, and I don't think we were able to leave until 3 or 4 p.m. Um, but many people were worried because many people's parents and aunts, uncles, friends, family members worked in the city. And the phone lines were absolutely jammed. Some people had cell phones at this time in school, but you couldn't get through.
right.
Everything was jammed. Um, so it was pretty scary, and we were just locked up in the school. We couldn't go anywhere. Um, and then we walked home, and when we walked home, you could you could smell burning. You could
Yeah,
feel the weight of the air because the debris was blowing over from the city. Um, it was obviously quite a day, very impactful for
right.
everyone. And then it really hit us how vulnerable we are as a nation to terrorism because I think that our country had been under the impression that nobody would even try it,
For
and
oh, yeah, definitely, definitely.
like, and now here we were, this
Yeah,
horrible tragedy. Um, and at the time, I wasn't 18 yet. I still had a couple years to go, and but I already knew I wanted to serve and I wanted to make a difference, particularly in fighting against like criminal organizations.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it played a role in my decision, obviously. But at the time I was very much impacted by crime in Latin America as well, especially being from New York. Many of my friends had come from Latin American countries and they were directly impacted by the violence and crime. They were escaping it.
right.
Um, and unfortunately, our country didn't really have strong refugee programs for Latin Americans at that time. So many people were here illegally, and I developed a really strong compassion for that, especially when ninth grade, even before the 9/11 attack. Now we're talking about 2001. The organization called La Marasa La Chucha, which is a criminal organization, primarily with Salvadoran members. They came from El Salvador to hunt down some of the members that they had felt defected. So they actually like traced people from Latin America to New York to come and kill them, and they did
Oh my
kill a
gosh.
friend of mine. Yeah.
Holy
So
mackerel.
they killed a friend of mine, but his name was Dago. They killed him, but they were targeting the person I was dating at the time. So that played like an even larger role in my decision to join the military than 9/11. Um, and I got a lot of judgment for that when people ask me about 9/11.
Well, no,
I have been
that's
told,
fascinating. That's fascinating.
yeah, I have been told. I mean, I remember in 10th grade after 9/11, and I obviously was impacted by what happened,
Right.
when people ask me later, well, what was your decision based on, and how did you feel about this event? And I was like, yeah, obviously I felt something about that event,
Yeah.
but this actually was a little closer to home because,
Right.
you
A
know,
very intimate connection there.
right. And fortunately, I didn't lose a family member um, in the attack. I had family members that were affected, but thankfully, all my family members are alive relative to the 9/11 attack. But this other incident in my life was much more influential in me making my decision to want to do something about the instability and crime that was affecting our borders. Um,
Right.
and coming up into New York, like nobody really thinks about it. Some people think about countries in Latin America like, oh, third world danger, which isn't entirely true. There's an economic and social aspect to what's going on down there, but they don't think about how it's affecting the United States. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
so
So
yeah,
that
that's
that is really interesting, and Latin America is going to play a quite large role here as we continue with your story.
yeah.
So Jess, what MOS would you enlist with?
I joined as a cryptologic linguist.
What exactly is that?
It signals intelligence. So you're basically listening, reporting. You're doing intelligence work. Some of it is here, some of it is, on deployment. We had a special category that we called stractical because we weren't quite locked up in a SCIF, which for those not familiar, is sensitive compartmentalized information facility. It's a big box with like no windows and one door and probably a fire hazard that's secure.
Right.
Um, so you're not quite in that environment all the time when you're doing intelligence. Many intelligence missions are boots on the ground or in the air, and I was actually on an aerial platform in my first unit. And the whole reason that we're here, Chris Coughlin, he was also an intelligence professional and deployed and boots on the ground
Yeah.
type as well. So I did some work kind of similar to him, and so that was my first MOS was intelligence. And back then there were subspecialties, but you did a little bit of everything. So even
Okay.
though I was primarily signals, I also did analysis. I also did all sorts where I pulled information from other sources, not directly from the tools that we were using as intelligence professionals. And of course, there's always the training aspect and mentorship aspect and language aspect that we
So
had to maintain.
what was your initial training like for this, Jess?
Well, at the time that I came in, they did language school first, um, with language dependent MOSs, the military has gone back and forth about whether people should go to language school first or go to the technical school first because many people fail the language. And if they
Okay.
don't have the language, they can't have that MOS. There's a
Right.
small group of MOSs in the military that you have to be proficient in another language in order to hold that MOS. It's a requirement. So the time I went in, we did language school first, and I remember taking the DLAB, the Defense Language Aptitude Battery, and I knew the cutoff. The cutoff, and at this time, obviously, we were very focused on Arabic,
Right.
Central Command,
Yep.
Middle East, and I said, I don't want to go over there. I want to go fight the FARC. I want to fight the narco terrorists, and which is Colombia, by the way. It's not El Salvador, but I had a whole, vendetta. So remember, they killed my friend. They killed
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
boyfriend. I had a vendetta. Not quite a vendetta, but I was like, this is really affecting the security of my
Yeah.
neighborhood. Like I want to, I want
Yeah.
to do something about it. So I said, I cannot get 100. So I was taking this test. It's a made up language with made up rules, and they're trying to assess your capacity for learning this made up language and made up rules. And it's difficult to fail it if you wanted to, but it's difficult to pass it anyway. So how do I hit the sweet spot? So I was like
Yeah.
trying to finagle it because I knew Spanish a little bit. I took French in high school. The grammar is the same. I picked up a lot of Spanish, like from French, music culture, New York.
Yeah.
And how do I sort of sway a made up language test? It was quite difficult. I got a 98, so instead of 100, I did what I set out to do, but unfortunately for me, that qualifies you for category three languages, which are like your Russian and your Pashto. Um,
Okay.
and I was slotted for Russian. Damn it! I don't want to go to Germany either. It's cold. Um, so they put me in Russian, and I went to DLI, the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, and I had a little bit of time before the class was supposed to start, and I tried to find out if I could switch my language. I really wanted to work in Latin America. So they set these requirements. They said, well, if you find someone who is the same sex, the same component, the same GT, which is like your general line scores for
Okay. Yep.
everything for people that aren't familiar, your GT score um, around the same age, like they gave me like 7 criteria that would seem impossible to meet. And so I said, okay, you're giving me an impossible task. As luck would have it, there was a girl who came into the
Stop.
reception to
Did you
tell me
find
where I
someone?
was. I sure did. I found someone. She had gotten mono in basic training, so she got held back from her class. She was slotted for a Pashto class,
Okay.
which is also category three. And so, because she got held back and now there were no more spots for her, her class was now going to be Spanish, which is a category one. So I said, do you want Russian instead? She said, yes. So we both went over to the drill sergeant.
Gosh.
And of course, they didn't make it easy. We met all
I'm
the different
sure. Yeah.
criteria. We had to go 2 or 3 times a day for over a month. And finally, they let us switch.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
she has had an amazing career.
That's
Um,
incredible.
she has had an amazing career. She met her husband in the language school. They work on some really really great and important missions still using that language. And I have had a really wonderful career in Latin America.
Oh my gosh. That's what
Yeah.
Wow, what a journey to that. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Mhm.
Um, just kind of looking back at that initial time training and, what is kind of most memorable to you that you took out of that training as a young soldier?
You know, I don't know that I've ever thought about this really, like what's most memorable, but I always enjoyed my training. I would say that, and most people listening to Coach's Corner have probably been through a schoolhouse at some point, and really my most enjoyable experience in a schoolhouse environment was with the Special Warfare Center in Fort Bragg. Um, it was fun, it was a lot of a lot of field time, but the way that it's organized, what you learn, everything was really valuable, and I have applied the knowledge that I had, and this is from my second MOS, as a psychological operations NCO. Um, that I have applied that knowledge and skill set to like everything from the time that I acquired it. Um, and I really respect how that schoolhouse operated, how it's organized, and the balance that they had between tactical, technical, and educational training. So I would say, even though I was like a little bit older by that time, I don't know, when did I go over there? It was 2009.
Okay.
So, now I'm what, like 20, 23, something like that, 22, 23. Um, but that was I think some of the most valuable training that I had.
It's incredible. Jess, where would your career take you post training? What would happen?
So like I said, I switched MOSs a couple of times. I also worked as a military police later in my career when I transitioned
Okay.
off active, going into the guard. Um, but I have primarily worked in Latin America and the Caribbean. Um, I was in Colombia, Honduras, El Salvador. We work missions from the rear as well. Um, the op tempo is 365, 24/7. So we have, swing shifts, midday, morning, um, intelligence missions and psychological operations missions are both um, critical skills fields, which means that there are not as many people to fill them as we need.
Okay.
So you're always working with these missions, and you get to go to a lot of places, not just on deployment, but also to support the missions
Okay.
that are forward deployed.
Jess, what were some of the unique challenges of doing the work that you did in Latin America?
Oh well, right off the top of my head, one of the biggest challenges is that, being in the military, you put on the uniform and you sort of try to expect you're going to have a certain amount of respect.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's not always the case, not even from people in other countries, but from, people in your same
Yeah.
uniform.
Right.
Um, but, but navigating being treated a certain way as a woman versus operational successes, or seeing those opportunities for operational successes was always a bit of a fine line, because lacking decorum and professionalism can sometimes put the success of the mission at risk, but also letting things go too far can likewise put it at risk,
Yeah.
right? So that was always a very delicate situation to navigate, and it came up quite frequently, especially because the missions that I did, we were small teams. Sometimes it might have just been me and a soldier, and I'm dealing with not only foreign service militaries, but also politicians, government officials, um,
Right, right.
police, civilians as well. Sometimes the bad guys. So there's something you're trying to accomplish, and you always have to weigh what is more important and what is going to be okay and what is going to put the success of the mission at risk, and then what really challenges your personal values, right? So, as a female specifically, and I don't want to say this like, well, if a female wasn't part
Yeah,
of the
right.
equation, then the thing would go better. Because hell no, it wouldn't. Because I'll tell you right now that I had more mission success than a lot of my male counterparts because of my ability to quickly build rapport, extract information, um, and and just talk to people, um, and put them at ease. And a lot of times that's because people are more willing to open up to women.
Right.
So I don't want to say that it was difficult and it's a difficult situation because I'm a woman. We had mission success because I'm a woman many times, but it was something that constantly had to be metered, weighed, that I had to be conscientious of. I had to mentor younger female soldiers about this because they would get into situations, and
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I heard I heard from a female soldier of mine, why are you so mean to everyone? And it wasn't that I was mean. It was that they hadn't yet matured enough to understand professional boundaries and being assertive. Because we have, unfortunately, a society that puts different labels on dedication and assertiveness when it comes
Yes,
from a woman.
absolutely.
So that
Absolutely.
was really, and then as people are pretty familiar with cultures in Latin America. Um, so it's an extra delicate balance working in those regions.
Thank you for talking through that with us, Jess. That's absolutely fascinating. Um, you talked to us and you expressed at the beginning of the episode, this great desire and drive and the impact that you had seen crime, or rather organized crime, coming out of Latin America, and the effect it had on you, where you lived, and people that you were very close with. So this was, if I'm not misspeaking it, it was the fight that you wanted to go after. You wanted to go after this and pursue it, and you had to jump through lots of hoops, and everything had to fall into place, for you to be able to get that, the language and the selection to go down there. And you did, and you would deploy to Latin America many times. Sitting
Hmm.
here, now, some 15 plus years removed from joining and starting that mission. Do you feel like you accomplished kind of on the front end what teenage Jessica wanted to accomplish in Latin America? Do you feel like you were able to do that?
Oh yeah, I had a really rewarding career, and I'm still participating in that fight. Believe it or not, 2 days ago, somebody that I had made connections with while I was working in Honduras, and actually got him on board with a program developing products for us against human trafficking, um, integrated with the embassy contracting system, everything. He's now in Spain. He contacted me and said, I think that my aunt is a victim of human trafficking.
Oh my gosh.
He said, what's going on? What can we do? So, without going into the whole story about the details, this is somebody that wasn't aware that human trafficking, modern day slavery, was something that affected anybody else except young women, because most people think it's synonymous with sex slavery
Right.
and sex trafficking, but it's not. Um, Trafficking of very young children and older people, exploitation of older people, is very common, especially for labor exploitation. So, um, the person that he was concerned about is somebody who is older and he felt was being exploited. So because he worked with me on these programs, was able to recognize the signs and reach out to me, and I was still able to, connect my network of of individuals to address the issue and make sure that now things
Wow.
are in motion to break up this labor exploitation ring in Spain, which is coming from Latin America. So I'm still, not as involved as I was when I was boots on the ground in the country. I'm working towards doing that again, but I still have um, pride in what I did and feel that I put a dent in not only activities like that, which are despicable, um, but other sorts of activities in the realm of terrorism, which people aren't even aware really affect Latin America. And what I'm saying is like terrorist organizations out of the Middle East that are operating.
Yeah.
So I I do feel like I accomplished a lot. I'm proud of what I did, and I feel that um, in terms of being able to better inform the intelligence community and the people who are working to stop this type of activity,
Yeah.
um, which is control through fear, right? It's terrorism.
Yes.
It's,
Yep.
we don't put that label on what's going on in Latin America a lot, but it's control through fear and violence. That's terrorism. Um, I did a lot. I did something.
Yeah.
That's the operative
Yes, you did.
word.
Yeah.
And for all the people who told me get out of the country because I didn't cry when the towers fell. I was not everybody cries. I didn't cry. They told me the same thing when I broke my arm. Your arm is not broken because you didn't cry. I was like,
Oh,
well,
jeez.
the X-ray says something different.
Yeah. Right. Right. Oh my
um,
gosh.
so for all those people that spend a lot of time talking about how people like me should get out of the country, maybe they need to look at how they were spending their time and what they did because I know
Oh,
I did
absolutely.
something.
Yes. And
So
just thank you so very much for your service to our great country and all that you've done to improve the lives of those in Latin America and here too, and really worldwide. Um, I want to ask you, and you were just speaking to it, but I think there definitely is a disconnect, between, and I'm just going to say kind of civilians across the board, and I'm just referring to people that aren't in, actively in the military right now, or they're not in intelligence type of work. But Jessica, what would you say today to people? If I said, "What can you tell us about terrorism today in 2022?" Because I think we all have, different views of it, or what's still going on out there. What can you tell us about terrorism in 2022?
well, the first thing I can say is that the way that our country, our government classifies what is terrorism and what isn't terrorism is when there's a political motivation. But what we have seen is that criminal organizations have had a lot of success shifting from petty crime and control through fear and violence into the legitimate political realm, where now there are things like false peace. And I'm speaking specifically about Colombia at this point, but it's also
Okay.
happened in Venezuela. It's also happened in other countries, Nicaragua. And we are seeing a lot more involvement from malign actors, um, like organizations that we do classify as terrorist organizations in the Middle East and Korea and Russia, like different countries
Yeah.
that have people that we're not very friendly with or fond of. They are amping up their involvement in Latin America. So, what does that mean for us? It means the threat from an influence that does not align with our ideology is coming closer and closer to our borders. Um, Not just technologically, which is what everybody's
Yeah.
focused on now, and they should be focused on that because that is how things are shifting. But this is also a physical threat and an ideological threat. Um, So it's not something that we should ignore, especially as a country. We shouldn't take it for granted that everybody loves America, everybody wants to
Yeah.
be like us, and that everybody should be like us, because that's not the case. Not everybody has our history or our
Right.
culture.
Yep.
It might not work for everyone. Um, but the bottom line is, just random civilians, if they want to be safe going around the world, uh, really just have a little more compassion for your fellow man, and it might take you very far.
Yeah, that's good advice for anybody right across the board. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's not much people can do on an individual level to really just fight terrorism, but be aware that it's not in some far off land. Like, it's coming closer and closer to your backyard.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that sounds very ominous. No, he doesn't sound like that. But
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah, it's a
it's not
very
something that's in the past. It's
right,
now.
it's a very real and alive thing.
Yeah.
That's it for this week's episode of Coach's Corner. We will return next Wednesday at 1 Eastern Time with another episode. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing your story and your light with us all today. It was so much fun to get to talk to you. Thank you to Lynn Coughlin, Henry Pomper, and Kaylee Nasiri for your work in making this podcast possible week after week. And we thank the entire Catch a Lift team. Don't forget to join us every Wednesday live at 1 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for a chance to win Cal Swag and to chat with your brothers and sisters. Until next week, keep it real and stay Cal strong.